si nunca han viajado, siguiendo algo, elevan el vuelo, ¿cuál es su destino?
My guest today is Jeff Nevin, professor of mariachi at Southwestern College in Bonita. As a matter of fact, we both live in Bonita. We're almost neighbors. So welcome, Jeff. Good to have you here.
Thanks. Good to be here.
You're the local expert on mariachi, so I think I just want to have a few minutes to talk to you about what mariachi is, what are the basic elements of the style, and eventually to talk a little bit about Cruzar, which is what we're all looking forward to. Of course, this is the very first mariachi opera, so it makes sense to bring in not only a mariachi expert, but a mariachi instrumentalist. You're a trumpeter with groups, and you have your own group,
yes.
A number of them.
Yes, several.
And tell us, first of all, the origin of the word mariachi, because there's a story floating around out there that I don't think is quite right.
Yeah, there's, well, it's funny, if the origin of the music, I'll go back a little bit farther, which is just that it's obviously Mexican folk music.
Right.
But the instruments that we use in mariachi, which violins, of course, are very important. There's the smaller guitars called the vihuela. And then there's a regular guitar, just in Spanish, guitarra. And then a guitarrón is a really big guitar. And the trumpet, which is standard now, that for a while really wasn't. But those instruments, the vihuela, violin, guitarrón, those are European instruments from the Renaissance. Mm-hmm. So I've a friend who was in Italy and went to the Stradivarius Museum and took a picture of some instruments. It's like there's a vihuela and a guitarrón that looks.
There was a guitarrón.
There was a guitarrón and a vihuela in the Stradivarius Museum.
That's interesting.
That looks exactly like Mexican instruments. And I remember as a music student in Illinois, I went to my first music history class, and we're sitting in this book and we're learning about the Renaissance in Europe, and they said, oh, well, there's types of guitars that were around that are no longer used. One of them was called the vihuela, and I was like, excuse me, in Mexico they have vihuelas all over the place. But my point for this is that the Spanish conquistadors, they had musicians with them. They brought their instruments on the boats when they went. And Cortez loved music. He brought his instruments and musicians with them into Mexico. And very shortly after Cortez got into Mexico, so I think it's 1529 or so is when Cortez went into Mexico. Like in 1532, they already had music schools teaching the native people there and the mestizos now the European music. So that's kind of the origin of mariachi. But everybody's like, well, where does the word come from?
Exactly.
That's your question.
Well, because the old, what I know now is really a legend, because I've heard it for years, is that mariachi was a kind of a bastardization of the word mariage from when the French had taken over Mexico for a while.
Right, exactly. And that's people have said that there's a dictionary of Mexican Spanish from 1904, 1905 or so, where that's the citation. And that's where everybody learned it from. So somebody back then had this idea that mariachi sounds a lot like mariage. Sure, there were French people in Mexico. The French invaded Napoleon's army. Invaded, I think it's 1860s, 65 more or less.
But then they discovered the word.
But then they discovered the word existed before that.
Predates,
so, yeah, exactly. So there's no chance. One, it's kind of a sense of pride for Mexican folks. It's like, well, it's not French music; it's Mexican music.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's absolute hard evidence that. There's letters written before the French ever got there that refer to mariachis. They actually say mariachis in some places, they call them fandangos, but here we call them mariachis, and it was referring to a party, to a celebration. So there was a mariachi last night where there were hundreds of people, and they were playing games and
like the word fiesta.
Like fiesta, exactly. Fiesta, fandango. Mariachi, mitote is an indigenous word, and all of those words just meant the same thing back then. The very, very earliest reference to the word mariachi that anybody's found so far is actually the name of a town. It's a rancho, so it's in birth records that they recorded. So and so, I forget the name, but this such and such person was born in mariachi, and they were baptized on this date.
Not as a result of a mariachi.
As not a result of mariachi, probably both.
Now, some of the forms, they're actually dance forms that are used in mariachi, and this shouldn't surprise us. I mean, Baroque music and classical music is very, very close to dance forms from the European tradition.
Sure.
Well, in mariachi music, those dance forms also still exist.
Right.
But again,
there's some of them.
there's a difference.
There are some that are the same, and there are some that are different. So there are waltzes and there are polkas, and these are European dances that mariachis play. But there are certain ones that are called sones. S-O-N is the singular son.
The son.
Yeah, and those sorts of dances are really Latin American dances. So there are sones in South America, there's sones in Central America, there's sones in Cuba. But each region then we're talking 400 years now, has kind of developed their own type of son. So even Mexico is a large country. In eastern Mexico they have sones, one of them is very famous called the son Huasteco, or as a shorthand we call it Huapango, son Huasteco. They have son Jarocho, which if you've heard, the La Bamba is a very famous song, that's a very famous son Jarocho. Mariachis really grew out of western Mexico, excuse me, and the states of Jalisco is sort of central to where that is, but also the surrounding states, and so the son Jalisciense comes from Jalisco, is really the more traditional mariachi song. But today, mariachis play son Huasteco, we play son Jarocho, we play sones from Venezuela, they're called joropos, and lots of, so mariachis as an ensemble have picked up these other sones that come from all over. But the son is really this Latin American dance form that is, I think what happens when you leave those Spanish dance forms in the hands of Mexican people or Latin American people for 400 years. And they come up with different sorts of dance forms of their own.
I think one of the questions that our opera lovers may have is if mariachi is Mexican folk music, how is it possible that we have a mariachi opera written by a contemporary person?
Right. Well, that's again.
It's still a living art form, right?
Exactly. It's a very, very living art form, and it's as we've already discussed, it's a little bit misunderstood because the music goes back hundreds of years, but most of the songs that we'll play. So if I ask anybody what's your famous mariachi song, people start saying El Rey, Volver, Volver, Cielito Lindo. There's so many songs that are just very, very, very famous that people have heard and can sing and know by heart. Just walk on the street, anybody's going to start naming songs. Most of those songs were written within the last 70 years or so. So even though the music and the musicians have roots that go way back, most of the repertoire is much more recent. So we can name the most famous mariachi composers, Jose Pepe Martinez and Tomás Méndez and many, Agustín Lara. Many of them, a lot of their songs have sort of been treated as classical songs now. Agustín Lara, he wrote Solamente una vez, which is a beautiful Mexican bolero, very romantic song. He also wrote Granada, which is Plácido Domingo's big famous song.
Yeah,
that's a classical song today, but when he wrote it in the 1940s or so, it was a popular song, and mariachis play that.
So it shouldn't raise anybody's eyebrows that
no, it's
that this mariachi opera is only a couple of years old.
Absolutely, and it even further, it's if one is thinking, well, mariachi with opera, it doesn't make sense. That we already talked about the dance forms, but even just the form combining these two types of music. In the beginning of the modern mariachi, so there was a transition from the early mariachis, where the word mariachi meant fiesta, to the modern mariachis, which is where we expect to see guys in nice tailored pants with silver buttons and things like that. So during that transition, mariachis were the accompanying orchestra in Mexico for famous Mexican movie stars and recording artists. So if we think back to the 1940s, in the United States, the golden age of Hollywood cinema, everybody was also an actor on screen in theaters where the screens are enormous, and you see the guy's head is this big, and he would stand up in front and he would sing a song to woo the woman in the song. So
it's like we had our Bing Crosbys.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. And so going back to that moment, in Mexico they had their own artists, and some of the first ones, two that I'll name, Jorge Negrete and Lucha Reyes, were both trained classical singers.
Negrete and the other one was?
Lucha Reyes.
Lucha Reyes,
exactly,
because I want to make sure they get the names right, as well as to post some pictures
Sure.
on our video of both of them, because Negrete I've heard of from childhood. Reyes, not as much.
She was the first woman. Actually, was famous a little bit before Jorge Negrete. So there's some movies with them appearing together. But she was huge superstar. Only had a career for maybe 10 or 15 years in the movies, but she was famous before then, singing in theater and singing in Europe and toured as a classical singer.
Right.
Jorge Negrete, his dream was to be an opera singer. Movies didn't exist yet, so his dream was to be an opera singer. And I'm told from someone who knew him that they saw a poster that said, Carmine Caruso singing the such and such role, and they were listing the singers. Jorge Negrete was right there as one of the singers in opera singing. I think was in New York. So he was making his career, and then this movies thing came along, and they needed a leading man who could sing and sort of represent this idealized. Mexican charro, Mexican cowboys on film. So they had to persuade Jorge Negrete to come back to Mexico to become a star in these movies. And so, when most people, even most Mexican people, heard mariachi for the very first time, I'm talking 1930,
right,
the late 30s, it wasn't the same mariachi that we're used to seeing. They heard mariachi as a backup ensemble with Jorge Negrete in front. Jorge Negrete was an opera singer. Lucha Reyes was an opera singer before they formed the style. And most of those first singers also had very refined, very full, very just amazing voices. Yeah. And it's only been in the last 40 years or so that, just like American pop music, has gone a little bit more towards the sort of pop sound, where you want a uniqueness in a voice. You want somebody that I can hit the radio and I know exactly who they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas all the singers from the 1940s, Bing Crosby and all these folks going back then, just had a little bit more maybe quality to their voice.
Yeah.
And that's what we look for in opera. So it's not unusual to have. It's not maybe it is unusual, but it's not wrong to imagine that a mariachi fits very well with opera singers, because from the beginning of this modern mariachi, opera singers were singing together.
One of the things that I find invigorating about mariachi is the rhythmic complexity that can't really be notated. Every composer says, you can only get so close in terms of notating exactly what it is that you want, but I think there's even more of a loose connection between what you hear in real life coming from a really good mariachi group and what's written on the page. The playfulness between 2 and 3,
sure,
I find so invigorating, so much fun.
Yeah, well, that's typical of the sones, especially. So 3/4 and 6/8, which is the same size, but instead of dividing in 3 beats, we divide it in 2 beats, like you said. And it's pretty much all of the sones all over Latin America has some sort of different kind of interplay between that. And it isn't, people like to say, well, they alternate between 6/8 and 3/4. No, they're happening at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
And
so if I'm doing 2, 1, 2, 1,
2,
2,
3,
1,
2, 3. We do it at the same time.
Yeah, it's just, and then you begin to wonder, well, where's the beat? It's marvelously chaotic and yet grounded at and I
love it, and it's something for folks like myself who have spent a lot. I've spent 30 years performing mariachi music now. It's I think 29 years, and at first it's completely strange, but then you get a sense, and then now I have students at Southwestern College who grew up with mariachi music, and I can just sort of show them these patterns, and they feel them innately, and it is possible for one to get to the point where you can just feel these innately. It's the same. I like to compare it more with jazz music. So if classical musicians, we sit and we learn with a metronome how to play straight notes, because if you can't play straight notes, you're not a very good musician. Jazz players, they can play straight, but then they say, no, we don't want to play straight all the time, so we would kind of play with those times. Mariachis do a lot of the same thing, but once you get a sense of the feel of this, it's not quite as mysterious as it seems on the surface.
Yeah. So. Now that you know Cruzar, let's pull back just a moment and talk a little bit about the composer, Jose Pepe Martinez, who is from the Mariachi Vargas de Tecalitlan, which is, bar none, the best mariachi group in the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They were formed 1898, so they're
probably one of the oldest.
They are, as far as I know, we cite them as the oldest continuingly performing mariachi. So there's no other mariachi still performing that was founded before then, as far as I know. And since the 1950s, they have on all the records it says the best mariachi in the world, Mariachi Vargas de Tecalitlan, and they have such a rich tradition, and there's we can go, I won't go into the history of how it's sort of evolved since that moment when it transitioned into a contemporary music. But at that moment, Mariachi Vargas was the most important, and their leader of the group is a man named Ruben Fuentes, who composed many of these songs in the 1950s, where if I could play recordings of you from 1952, which sound like very modern, very exciting, very new mariachi music from 1952.
Wow.
And things from 1949 sound like really old-fashioned, very quaint. And these are the songs that Ruben Fuentes wrote. He was the leader of Mariachi Vargas then. He still owns the group today. Pepe Martinez.
He's still alive.
He's still alive. He's going on 90 years old. And Pepe Martinez is their music director. So he's the onstage. He's the face of Mariachi Vargas. And he's been writing arrangements for them since he joined the group about 40 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
So,
the early 70s.
So Pepe is the one who composed the music, as well as some of the lyrics, along with Leonard Folia, who's the stage director.
Exactly. Yeah, for Cruzar. But Ruben Fuentes is the one who's been sort of behind the scenes, not so much with the opera. I mean, it's Pepe Martinez, but with Mariachi Vargas. So you mentioned Mariachi Vargas since 1950s, when Ruben Fuentes was in charge and kind of made this transition. There have been a whole lot of trends in mariachi. The first time we started playing, they started playing boleros, which is Cuban music, or joropos, which is Venezuelan music, or classical music. They have recordings of classical waltzes or transcriptions of classical pieces. They famously recorded The Poet and the Peasant Overture, and others. So there are many just pieces of classical music or pop songs, cumbias, dance songs. So there are all these trends.
So Fuentes really reinvigorated the form.
Exactly. Well, created it. He created the modern mariachi, whereas everything before him was early mariachi. It was different. And so for the last 60 years or so, Mariachi Vargas has created so many different avenues that some of them have sort of been dead ends. People don't want to do that anymore. But there's so many. All of the trends in modern mariachi they created first, and so they've been the most important group since then. And Pepe Martinez has been their musical director, and they're on stage, the face. He's the one who talks to the audience. He's the one, kids like me, who when I was 15 years old and I met them for the first time, he was the one standing up in front. I was like, that's Pepe Martinez. And I met him when I was 15 years old. So I met him. Coming
from a person who is firmly grounded in both the classical and the mariachi traditions, but having such a great love for mariachi and being involved in it for such a long time, how excited are you about the fact that we're doing this with Mariachi Vargas?
Sure. No, it's amazing. And I'd heard about the opera before. Just completely separately. It's one of those weird coincidences. It's where 5 or 6 years ago, I was sitting talking with Pepe Martinez in Guadalajara. I said, hey, so what are you doing? How's it going? He said, oh, well, Houston Opera just called me and they asked me to write an opera. I said, that's just amazing. I mean, it's to say nothing. It's I'm a composer too. It's like I wanted to write an opera.
Exactly.
But I mean, it's the biggest mariachi in the world, and he's one of the greatest composers and arrangers, and I was thrilled for him, and I said, I can't wait to hear it. And so they performed it in Houston, and then I heard all about that performance. I couldn't go, and then they went to Paris last year, and when they were in town, we had a little party at my house, and we were sitting, and they said, oh yeah, well, we're going to Paris in a few months to play.
Isn't that amazing?
And then
the Paris performance is all sold out. Yeah. So they're coming here, then they're going to Chicago Lyric Opera, they're going back to Houston.
Are they?
Yeah, it's going to be, it's a very exciting time for them, I think, which is terrific. Well, and we get the opportunity to share in it, which is wonderful.
Yeah, they've just the mariachi has been breaking new grounds, as I said, for 60 or 70 years. And it's not only for them to do something new and special like this, but it's for the world of mariachi music to have something that is so different, but it's not a left turn, it's a step ahead, I think. Yeah. And it's important for the music and for everyone.
Absolutely. Well, we're looking forward to it. Thank you for your words.
Thank you very much.
See you soon.
My pleasure.
All right.
No es fácil estar sin él, 6 meses pasan muy lento, los otros 6 viene aquí y no nos rinde el dinero. Antes podía soportar pobreza con la tristeza cuando él no estaba acá.